Hey, Wide Awake family. If you see this, it's your sign to smash that like button. Yes, you listening right now. That way YouTube shows you more amazing stories like this one. We love you all. Now enjoy the stories. I met her on Hinge on a Thursday night. Her name was Leah, or at least that's what her profile said. She had this calm energy about her, not overly flirty, not weird either. We'd been messaging for about a week before she suggested I come over for dinner. Normally I'd say no, especially since we hadn't met in person yet, but she made it sound so normal. She said she loved cooking, that she made a stew her friends always begged her to make. I didn't really think twice. She lived in a quiet area just outside the city, one of those detached houses that look brand new but still feel empty. When I got there, the first thing I noticed was how clean it was. Not the regular clean, but the kind that feels like nobody actually lives there. There were candles on the table, soft music playing, and the smell of something cooking hit me the second I stepped inside. It smelled strong, like spices and something sweet. She greeted me with a smile, wearing an apron that looked untouched, white, with a small red heart on it. Her kitchen was spotless. There were no dirty dishes, no mess, no sign that anyone had been cooking, yet the pot on the stove was steaming. She told me to sit down and poured me a drink. The way she moved felt rehearsed, like she'd done this routine before. I looked around the living room while she was busy in the kitchen. The walls were plain, no photos, no decorations except a single shelf of plants that all looked fake. Her sofa had plastic wrapping tucked under the cushions, like it was never meant to be used. The air was warm but dry, like the heating had been on too long. I noticed the front door had 3 locks and a chain latch. When she finally brought out the food, it was a bowl of stew that looked like it came straight from a magazine photo, perfectly thick, with chunks of meat and vegetables that looked almost too even. I took one bite, and it was good but weirdly sweet. She watched me the whole time while I ate, not touching her own bowl, just sipping water. I asked if she was going to eat, and she smiled like she didn't hear me. Halfway through the meal, she stood up suddenly, said she forgot something in the kitchen, and disappeared for a few minutes. I heard drawers opening, a cabinet shutting, and what sounded like metal clinking. When she came back, she sat across from me and started asking really specific questions. Stuff like if I live alone, if I had any allergies, if anyone knew I was there. I laughed awkwardly, thinking maybe she was just nervous. Then she mentioned something about how she liked quiet people. The way she said it made my stomach twist. The room felt smaller. The smell of the stew started to bother me, like it had a bitter edge to it I didn't notice before. I started feeling lightheaded, but I told myself I was just tired from work. A few minutes later, there was this loud knock on the door, 3 heavy bangs that made both of us jump. Her face went completely blank. I thought maybe it was one of her neighbors, but then a man's voice shouted something that made my blood go cold. They said her real name. It wasn't Leah. It was something else, longer, and they said it like they'd been looking for her for a while. Before I could even process what was happening, the front door burst open. Police stormed in, shouting orders, pointing flashlights, and yelling her name again. She froze, then tried to run for the back door, but 2 officers tackled her to the ground. I sat there, shaking, staring at the bowl of stew still steaming in front of me. One of the officers told me not to move and asked what I'd eaten. They took the bowl, put it in a clear plastic bag, and started snapping pictures of the table. I heard one of them say she poisoned 2 men before me. They'd both been found dead in their homes a day after meeting her, both from the same dish, homemade stew. I couldn't even speak. My hands were sweating, my throat was burning, and I started panicking that I might have eaten enough to get sick too. The paramedics came in and checked me, took me outside while they searched her house. The air outside felt freezing, but I could finally breathe. They kept asking me how much I ate, if I'd finished the bowl, what it tasted like. I told them it was sweet. One of them looked at me and nodded like that confirmed something. They said the poison she used had a sugary taste to cover the bitterness. They found more of it in her kitchen. Dozens of jars with different colored powders, each labeled with random numbers. The officers said she worked at a research lab years ago and had stolen a compound that caused slow paralysis. She'd invite men over, feed them, and wait until they passed out. The strange part was she never tried to hide the bodies. She just vanished before anyone connected her. When I read the news later, it said she'd been living under 3 different names. Each time she moved cities, she'd start using dating apps again, always mentioning her famous homemade stew. She never picked bars or cafes, only private dinners. They found notes in her house too, journals describing each person she invited over, what they talked about, what they wore. It felt unreal reading my own description in those notes, written a few hours before I met her. I think what still gets to me is how calm she was the entire time. There was nothing about her that screamed danger. No weird tics, no strange looks. Just someone who smiled too much and watched too closely. The part that keeps replaying in my head is her face when the police said her real name. She didn't look scared or surprised, just annoyed, like she'd been interrupted. They said if the police had come even half an hour later, I probably wouldn't have made it. That line sticks with me every time I eat something homemade now. I didn't even finish half the bowl, and that's probably what saved me. She was convicted a few months later, but I never went to the trial. I couldn't. I saw enough that night to know I was just a few spoonfuls away from ending up like the others. Sometimes I still remember that smell. Sweet, spicy, and just a bit off. Every time I walk past someone cooking stew, it gets me again and I feel sick. I haven't used Hinge since that night. When I matched with him, his profile barely had anything on it. Just a single picture of him sitting at a cafe table, half his face turned from the camera, and the line, "I work in data collection." I didn't think much of it. People write vague things all the time on Hinge, and he didn't look like the usual weirdo. Clean haircut, plain clothes, confident but quiet kind of look. We started chatting, and he was surprisingly normal. Not overly funny, not dry either, just calm, almost too calm. He asked to meet after a few days. Said he worked near the city center and knew a quiet cafe that made the best black coffee. I agreed because it was public, bright, and close to a busy street. He arrived first. I spotted him sitting by the window, already halfway through a cup of coffee, typing something on a small tablet that wasn't a brand I'd ever seen before. He looked up as I walked in and gave this polite smile like he'd rehearsed it. I sat across from him and noticed he didn't have a phone on the table, just that strange tablet and a small notebook with scribbles that looked like numbers and letters mixed together. I asked about his job, and he said he worked in data collection for private clients. When I asked what kind of data, he said, "Personal trends." His voice was steady but didn't explain much. I thought maybe he worked in marketing or analytics or something like that. The cafe was small but had these huge glass windows that looked out onto the street. Around lunchtime it filled up fast. We were near the corner, and from where I sat I could see most of the other tables. Across from us, there was this couple sitting side by side. They weren't eating, just 2 cups of coffee, and their eyes were locked on us. Not the normal curious kind of glance you give when you see a date happening. It was intense. At first, I tried to ignore it. Maybe they were just weird or bored, but they didn't talk to each other at all. They just stared mostly at him. Every time he moved his hand, their eyes followed. Every time he looked up, they looked down. I started feeling tense, and I think he noticed. He turned around casually, saw them, then smiled to himself like he found it amusing. He leaned back in his chair and started asking me strange questions. Stuff about what devices I owned, how often I used social media, and if I used public Wi-Fi. I laughed awkwardly, thinking maybe he was just trying to keep the conversation going, but he wrote down some of my answers in that notebook. It didn't feel like flirting anymore. It felt like an interview. Then I noticed something else. On his wrist, right under his sleeve, was a small black bracelet with a flashing light. It blinked every few seconds. I asked about it, and he said it was a tracker. I thought he meant a fitness tracker, but he said it recorded patterns. That word, patterns, stuck in my head. The couple across the room stood up suddenly. The woman whispered something to the man, and they walked to the counter but didn't order anything. They just pretended to look at pastries, then went back to their table. Their cups were still full, cold now. I started feeling this pressure in my chest, like something was off. Then he started explaining what he did. He said he worked with digital identities, that everyone online leaves behind trails that can be reconstructed into profiles. He said he could find out what someone bought, where they went, who they talked to, just from what they posted, liked, or shared. The way he said it sounded proud, not creepy, but it didn't sit right. While he was talking, the man from the other table got up again, but this time he came toward us. He stopped a few steps away, pretending to tie his shoe. Then he turned, glanced at me, and mouthed something I didn't catch. I froze. The woman stood up too and slipped something out of her bag, a badge. She held it low so only I could see. That's when everything flipped. The man suddenly spoke up, calling out the guy's real name. Not the one he told me on Hinge. He looked up instantly, his face drained of color. The cafe went silent. The couple walked straight to our table, pulled out IDs, and told him to stay seated. The woman's voice was sharp and loud enough for everyone to hear. She said they were private investigators. The guy didn't argue. He didn't even look surprised. He just sighed, reached into his pocket slowly, and put a small flash drive on the table. One of the investigators grabbed it and told him he was under investigation for identity theft and wire fraud. The rest of what they said blurred together because my head was spinning. People started recording on their phones. The cafe owner came out shouting for everyone to calm down. The investigators asked me if I knew him, if I'd shared anything personal, any photos, anything with my address. I said no, but I couldn't remember what I'd told him in chat. He had been asking small questions all week that now felt like they had a reason. Things like what area I live in, what bank I use, what kind of car I drove. It all seemed harmless before. They let him outside while everyone watched. He didn't resist. Just looked at me once before leaving, still calm, still with that rehearsed half smile. They made me stay behind to answer a few questions. The investigators told me they've been tracking him for weeks. He was part of a ring that built fake dating profiles to target people in certain income brackets. He'd copy everything from their online presence, photos, usernames, emails, and use it to open credit accounts or fake job applications. They found multiple fake IDs in his car, all with his face but different names. The tablet he had wasn't even registered. It was some modified device they said could clone Wi-Fi connections nearby and collect data without permission. I didn't even know that was possible. When I read the local news later that week, they said he'd stolen over 150 identities in the past year, including people he'd met on Hinge, Bumble, and other apps. He never took money directly. He'd just build fake versions of people online and sell them. The weirdest part is that he never messaged me again after that, but my phone started glitching a few days later. Random notifications from apps I didn't remember downloading. Emails from places I'd never signed up for. My laptop camera light turned on once while I wasn't using it. I reset everything, changed my passwords, but part of me still wonders if he kept a copy of something. Every time I walk past that cafe now, I can still picture him sitting there, calm as ever, typing away like he owned everyone's secrets. I never read another message from anyone on Hinge after that. She told me to park 2 streets away before our date, said it was for privacy because her ex lived nearby and still drove past sometimes. That should have been my first clue something was off, but it sounded reasonable in the moment. I parked where she told me, right by an old corner shop that looked half closed, and walked to meet her outside the restaurant. She was standing near the entrance already, leaning against a post, scrolling on her phone. When she saw me, she smiled too wide, like she'd been waiting forever. She was dressed casual but neat, hair done, makeup sharp. I remember thinking she looked way more put together than me, and for some reason that made me a bit nervous. The restaurant was small, a cozy Italian place tucked between a barber shop and a vape store. The lights were warm and dim, and you could smell garlic before even walking inside. I held the door open for her, and the second we stepped in, the air just changed. The host looked up from the stand, froze for a second, and then whispered something to the manager. The manager came over quickly, his face serious but awkward. He didn't look at me. He looked straight at her and said she wasn't allowed in. At first, I thought he was joking, but his tone made it clear he wasn't. She just stood there, pretending not to understand. I looked between them, completely lost, and then the manager leaned slightly toward me and whispered that she pepper sprayed one of the waiters last week for flirting. I froze. I thought he had to be mistaken. But she suddenly turned red and laughed it off, and said it was a misunderstanding. The manager didn't laugh. He told us we had to leave. She mumbled something under her breath, grabbed my arm, and pulled me out of there so fast I barely got a word in. Once we were outside, she acted like nothing happened. She said the waiter was a creep, that he made her uncomfortable, and that she had every right to defend herself. Her tone changed, though. It got sharp, defensive, like she was daring me to argue. I didn't want to fight about something I didn't understand, so I just suggested we go somewhere else. She said she didn't trust restaurants anymore and that we could just walk and talk. We started walking toward the park nearby, But I couldn't stop thinking about what the manager said. I kept glancing at her hands, wondering if she still carried pepper spray. She talked nonstop the whole way, mostly about people she didn't like. Old coworkers, her sister, her landlord, even a girl at the gym who apparently smiled too much. Every story ended with her being wrong somehow. At one point, she stopped walking, turned to me, and said she hated how people always judged her for defending herself. The way she said it didn't sound like she was venting. It sounded like a warning. She kept saying everyone twists stories to make her look crazy. We sat on a bench for a bit near the park fountain. There were a few families still around, kids running in circles, couples walking dogs. Normal stuff. But she wasn't paying attention to any of that. She was watching people. Every time someone passed us, her eyes followed them until they were out of sight. She even commented on random strangers, saying things like they looked too confident or too flirty. I didn't know what to say anymore, so I just kept nodding. After a while, I said I should probably get going since it was getting late. She stared at me for a second like she didn't believe me. Then she smiled again, that same wide smile from before, and said she'd walk me back to my car. I didn't want her to, but I couldn't think of a polite reason to say no. As we walked, she kept checking over her shoulder like she expected someone to be following us. I thought maybe her ex really was nearby, but no one was around. When we got to the car, she stopped and asked if I believed what the manager said. I said I didn't know what to believe, trying to stay neutral. Her face changed immediately, like a light switch flipped off. She said people like him always lie because they can't handle strong women. I said I understood, but she kept going, her voice getting louder, her words faster. She said men always make her look like a psycho whenever she stands up for herself. She took a step closer and said I looked like one of those guys too, quiet but judgmental. At that point, I realized I needed to end it. I unlocked my car and said I should get home. She didn't move. She stood by the passenger side, staring at her reflection in the window. Then, out of nowhere, she laughed. Not like a funny laugh, more like the kind that comes out when someone's reached the edge of their patience. She said maybe the manager had a crush on her and was embarrassed she rejected him. Then she added that she still had her pepper spray just in case she ever saw him again. She patted her purse when she said it. I told her to take care and got in the car. She didn't say bye. She just stood there watching me start the engine. I didn't even look back when I drove off. When I turned the corner, I saw her reflection in the side mirror, still standing under the streetlight, still staring. Later that night, I checked her profile again. It was gone. Deleted. I searched her name on Google just out of curiosity. I didn't find much, but there was a local article from 2 months before about a woman being questioned for assault after an incident at a gym. The description matched her exactly, same name, same area. Apparently, she'd sprayed a personal trainer in the face after accusing him of smirking at her. That was the moment it all clicked. The restaurant thing wasn't some misunderstanding. It was a pattern. She wasn't unlucky. She was dangerous. I blocked her on everything after that. But for a few days, I kept thinking she might somehow find me again. She knew my car. She knew roughly where I parked. I even started parking in different streets just to be safe. It's weird how someone can seem completely normal until they're not. You think you're just going for dinner and end up realizing you sat across from someone who's completely unpredictable. I don't go on random first dates anymore, especially not with anyone who says privacy like it's a warning.
Hey guys, really sorry to interrupt. If you're still listening, then you're enjoying the story so far. And if you are enjoying, then please hit that like button. That's all I ask of you. Thanks so much. Now back to the stories.
It started out normal, just a chill date at a coffee shop. He was one of those guys that texted in full sentences. Never too dry, but never over the top either. His name was Aaron, and his profile said he worked in property management, mostly short-term rentals. That made sense, since he kept mentioning travel and how he always stayed in cozy hidden Airbnbs. He seemed quiet but smart, the kind of guy who had everything together. We met on a rainy Sunday afternoon. The cafe was half empty, quiet except for the sound of milk steaming and people typing on laptops. I got there first and grabbed a seat near the window. When he walked in, I recognized him instantly. Same haircut, same gray jacket as his pictures. But something about him looked more tired in person. His eyes were dark, like he hadn't slept much. He smiled when he saw me, but it looked forced. He kept glancing around like he was waiting for someone else to show up. I thought maybe he was just shy or anxious. He sat down and ordered tea, but barely touched it. I tried to keep the conversation going, stuff about work, travel, favorite food. But every few minutes, he glanced for the cafe door or the counter, like he was tracking someone. I finally asked if he was okay. He said yeah. He just didn't like sitting with his back to the door. He laughed after saying it, trying to make it sound like a joke, but it didn't sound funny. He was watching everything. Even the people outside walking past the window. His knee was bouncing the whole time. When I asked about his job, he perked up. Said he managed a few rental properties across the city. He called them smart homes because he installed cameras, smart locks, and hidden sensors to keep track of guests. He said it helped prevent damage and theft. I thought that sounded clever, but there was something weird about how he described it. He talked about the cameras like he enjoyed the idea of knowing what people did inside. Like it wasn't just about safety, it was about control. He mentioned once that guests do weird things when they think they're alone. He said it with a small grin. I didn't even know how to respond to that. I tried to steer the topic somewhere else, but he kept looping back to his rentals. How he had to check in remotely and keep an eye on patterns. I assumed he meant bookings, but the way he said it sounded off. Then I noticed he wasn't looking at me anymore. His eyes were fixed behind me on two people sitting near the counter, a man and a woman. They looked normal enough, mid-30s maybe, both dressed casual. But Aaron wouldn't stop staring at them. Every time the man adjusted his phone or moved his cup, Aaron tensed up. I asked if he knew them, and he just muttered something about seeing them before. The air got heavy after that. He wasn't talking much, just fidgeting with his phone and checking the door again. Then suddenly, the man and woman stood up. They walked straight toward our table. I thought maybe they were friends of his, but the second they reached us, they pulled out badges. Everything around us froze. They told him to stand up. No shouting, just calm and direct. One of them reached for his arm while the other read something from a small notebook. Aaron didn't argue. He went completely still, then looked at me and said I should go. The entire cafe went silent. Everyone was staring. They cuffed him right there. The woman asked me if I was with him. I nodded slowly, still trying to figure out what was happening. She told me to stay seated while they escorted him outside. He didn't fight. Didn't yell. Just walked quietly, head down, like he'd known this was coming. A few minutes later, one of the officers came back inside. She said they'd been following him for weeks. He wasn't in property management at all. He'd been renting out fake Airbnbs under stolen names, setting up hidden cameras inside, and filming people through mirrored panels he'd installed himself. He even sold some of the footage online. My stomach dropped when she said that. Apparently, a couple had found one of his devices behind a mirror in the bathroom of a rental. It looked like a power outlet, but wasn't. It was a tiny lens connected to a remote server. They traced it back to him. They've been tracking him since, waiting for him to slip up. He booked this cafe for another meeting earlier in the week, and they figured he'd come back. I just sat there frozen, trying to process that the guy who'd been nervously sipping tea across from me was a criminal being punted by police. The officer asked if I'd given him any personal details, address, work, social media. I said we'd only been chatting a week, and she nodded but took my number just in case they needed to follow up. After they left, everyone in the cafe started whispering. I could still see the flashing lights from outside. They'd parked an unmarked car right near the curb. Aaron was standing by it, hands cuffed, still calm, still silent. He looked straight at me through the glass window as they pushed him into the car. That look stuck with me more than anything else that happened. Later that night, I couldn't stop thinking about everything he'd said during the date. The way he talked about people doing weird things when they think they're alone. The way he'd watched the door, probably realizing he was about to get caught. I read a local article the next day. His full name was there, along with pictures of several hidden cameras police had seized. They found drives with hundreds of clips from different properties. Some of the victims didn't even know they'd been filmed until investigators showed them proof. It messed me up for weeks. I started checking every mirror whenever I stayed somewhere new. Hotels, rentals, even public bathrooms. I'd catch myself tapping mirrors or shining my phone flashlight at corners just to make sure. I kept thinking about how normal he seemed. He smiled, asked about my day, held the door open, all of it. But under all that, he was hiding something disgusting. It made me realize how easily people can fake being ordinary. The police never called back, but I kept expecting them to. Like maybe they'd find my name somewhere in his messages or something. They didn't. I guess it was just another person he happened to meet before everything caught up with him. Now, whenever I go on dating apps, I scroll slower. I don't trust blank profiles anymore. I don't trust people who talk too much about privacy or tech stuff either. It's weird because nothing actually happened to me that day, but I still think about it all the time. Every time I see a mirror in a place I don't live, I check it, just in case. She picked the restaurant, said it had a nice view and good lighting. I didn't think much of it at first. She seemed normal on Hinge, funny, casual, not overly filtered like some people. Her name was Mia. We'd only talked for a few days before meeting up. She messaged first, said she liked that I didn't post gym selfies. It felt low effort in a good way. The plan was simple. Late lunch on a Saturday. I got there a bit early and grabbed a table near the back, but the second she walked in, she pointed straight to the window. She said she liked being able to see everything going on outside. I shrugged and moved with her. The table faced the street, which was busy but not packed. I remember thinking it was kind of weird she wanted that exact spot, but she smiled the whole time like she planned it. She was dressed up more than I expected. Full makeup, heels, hair curled. She had a big tote bag too, which she placed on the floor right beside her chair. Every few minutes, she glanced at it. We ordered food and talked, but the whole time she kept looking past me, out the window. At first, I thought she was distracted by something happening outside, maybe traffic or a street performer. Then I noticed she wasn't looking randomly. She was looking directly across the road. I followed her line of sight and froze. There was a guy standing across the street with his phone up, pointing right at us. He wasn't pretending to text or scrolling. He was clearly recording. He was tall, hood up, holding the phone steady. I couldn't see his face clearly, but I could tell from the way his body was angled that we were the focus. I asked her who he was, and she just said, "Don't worry about it." She said it like it was nothing. Like having someone film us in public was totally fine. My stomach dropped. I asked again, and she sighed, said it was her ex, and that he'd been following her around. I felt awkward immediately, caught between wanting to help and wanting to leave. She said she had a restraining order in process, but the police needed proof that he was still bothering her. Then it clicked. The window seat, the dressed-up look, the oversized bag that she kept glancing at. She hadn't picked the spot by accident. She'd staged the entire thing. I didn't know what to say. I just sat there while she kept eating, acting like nothing was wrong. She told me to just ignore him, that she needed footage of him harassing her. But he wasn't doing anything except recording. I looked again, and sure enough, his phone was still up. A few people walking by turned their heads, but didn't stop. I started feeling uncomfortable being part of whatever was happening. I didn't want to get caught in some drama between two people I didn't even know. I told her maybe we should leave, but she said no, that it was almost done. Almost done. That phrase made me freeze. Done with what? Then I realized something else. She wasn't just eating. She kept occasionally glancing down her bag and tapping her phone. I thought she might be messaging someone, but when I leaned slightly to look, I saw she had her camera open too, recording herself. The screen showed both of us in the frame, with the window and her ex visible behind us. That's when it really hit me. I wasn't on a date, I was a prop. She was using me to make it look like she was moving on, to make the guy jealous, or worse, to make it seem like he was harassing her while she was trying to live her life. I felt trapped. If I walked out, I'd look like I was abandoning her in the middle of being stalked. If I stayed, I was part of whatever story she was recording. I kept watching the man across the street. He wasn't moving, but now I could see him talking to his phone, maybe streaming. People started noticing him, giving weird looks. He didn't care. Then suddenly he crossed the street. My pulse spiked. I thought he was coming over to confront us, but he stopped just outside the restaurant and started yelling her name. Not loudly enough for everyone to panic, but loud enough that heads turned. She stayed completely calm. She looked at me and said to keep eating. He shouted something about her lying, said she'd been doing this for weeks. I looked at her and she didn't even flinch. She quietly turned her phone toward him and said, "There, that's proof." It was all being recorded. Every word, every move. She wanted this reaction. The manager came over and told the guy to leave. He argued, saying she was baiting him, that she'd done it before, but security started pushing him away. The whole restaurant was watching. I wanted to disappear. After he finally walked off, she just exhaled and smiled like she finished some kind of mission. She thanked me for being cool about it, said she just needed one more clip to give her lawyer. I didn't say a word. I just nodded and kept staring at my untouched plate. I stayed until she paid because I didn't know how to leave without making a scene. As soon as the bill was sorted, I said I had somewhere to be and got up. She asked if I could walk her to her car, but I lied and said I parked in the opposite direction. She looked annoyed, but didn't argue. When I stepped outside, I saw the same guy standing far down the street again, still recording. My gut told me to keep walking and not look back. Later that night, I checked her profile again. It was gone. Deleted. Out of curiosity, I searched her name online. I found a Reddit post from a guy describing a woman with her same first name and city who had tricked multiple men into going on fake dates while she filmed her ex following them. He said she used the footage to push a restraining order through, and that the ex eventually got arrested for harassment, even though half the videos were staged. It made me sick to think I might have helped her do that. I didn't know who to believe, but the whole thing felt wrong. I never heard from her again, and honestly, I'm glad. Now, whenever someone insists on sitting by the window, I always ask why. He messaged me first, said he didn't like normal bars because they were too mainstream. I laughed it off and told him I wasn't into the loud club scene either, so when he said he knew a secret bar that only locals knew about, it sounded kind of cool. I thought it'd be one of those hidden speakeasy places behind a fake door or a coffee shop. The way he described it made it sound mysterious but harmless. He picked me up just after 8. He was quiet in person, not awkward exactly, just focused. He didn't say much during the drive, just kept his eyes on the road. He wasn't dressed up either, plain black shirt, cargo pants, and boots. I asked if the bar had a dress code, and he said, they don't care about that kind of thing. The way he said, they stuck with me. We drove out of the city, past the main strip of restaurants, and into this industrial area I didn't even know existed. It was quiet, just warehouses and storage units. No lights, no signs, no people. When he finally parked, I thought we were lost. There was one warehouse with dim yellow lights above the door and a line of people waiting to get in. It didn't even have a name. Just a metal door and 2 guys standing beside it, both wearing the same gray jackets. I'd asked if it was safe, and he said yeah. It was just an underground social club. Said they didn't advertise because they wanted to keep the wrong crowd out. The people in line looked normal enough, some couples, some groups, all holding drinks already. Nobody seemed nervous. When we got inside, it was dark but warm. The walls were concrete but painted black, and there were string lights hanging low across the ceiling. A DJ booth was set up in one corner, and people were standing around small wooden tables, talking quietly. It didn't look like a regular bar, though. No actual counter, no bartenders. Just a few people walking around handing out drinks in metal cups. He handed me one and said it was a signature mix. It tasted strange, sweet but earthy, like herbs and fruit blended together. I asked what was in it, and he just smiled and said it was part of the fun. I took a few sips anyway because everyone else seemed fine. The weird part started when this woman in a white dress got on a small platform and started talking. She welcomed everyone, said she was happy to see so many new faces. Everyone clapped like they'd been waiting for her. Then she said tonight was special because it was an initiation night. People around us started whispering, and I noticed some of them weren't drinking at all. They were just watching. She told everyone to form a circle around the center of the room. My date guided me with his hand on my back, and I went along because I didn't know what else to do. Once we were in the circle, she said anyone who wanted to start fresh should step forward. A few people did. She smiled and told them to remove their shoes as a sign of leaving behind their old selves. That's when I realized this wasn't a bar at all. More people stepped forward, some laughing awkwardly, some serious. They handed their shoes to a man who placed them in a crate by the wall. It looked organized, like they'd done this before. Then the woman started humming, and others joined in, low and slow, almost like a chant. I leaned toward the guy I came with and asked what was going on. He said it was just part of the ritual, but his tone had changed. He wasn't smiling anymore. He was focused on the woman like he was waiting for something. I tried to laugh it off, but he didn't even look at me. The chanting got louder. The lights dimmed, and the woman started walking around the circle, stopping in front of each barefoot person. She pressed her hand against her forehead, said something I couldn't make out, and then gave them a silver coin. Everyone clapped quietly each time she did it. Something felt wrong. It didn't feel like a joke anymore. I whispered that I wanted to leave, but he ignored me. I said it louder, and he told me to just wait. That's when I saw one of the gray-jacketed men near the door looking at me. He wasn't smiling. The woman announced that everyone knew should drink again from their cups to seal a promise. That's when I put mine down on the table. I didn't even care if it was rude. I told him I wasn't drinking anymore and started backing away toward the entrance. The man near the door stepped in front of it. Right then, loud banging came from outside. The music stopped. The chanting stopped. For a second, everything froze. Then the door burst open and light flooded in. Police stormed the room shouting for everyone to stay where they were. People screamed and tried to run, but there was nowhere to go. The woman in white started yelling something about misunderstanding, but they grabbed her first. One officer shouted that they'd been tracking the group for months. Apparently, it wasn't a social club at all. It was some kind of recruitment cult. They did advertising on dating apps, using fake profiles to lure people to mixer events. They'd lock the doors and pressure people into joining through weird purification rituals. The shoe thing was just the first step. Once people handed them over, they weren't allowed to leave until the night was over. I stood frozen near the back while officers questioned everyone. The guy I came with didn't even look surprised. They cuffed him too, and one officer said he'd been at multiple initiation nights. He wasn't just a random guest. He was part of it. They took everyone's names and checked IDs. Some people were crying. Some just stood there blankly. When I told one of the officers how I got there, he wrote everything down and said they'd found flyers online advertising it as the hidden bar. He said the group promised spiritual freedom through anonymity. They let me leave after a while. When I stepped outside, the cold air hit me hard. The entire street was filled with police cars, flashing red and blue lights bouncing off the walls. They were loading boxes of the group's stuff into vans, crates full of shoes, metal cups, silver coins. When I got home that night, I blocked him and deleted the app. I read an article a few days later that said the group had been investigated before in other cities. They'd keep moving warehouses every few months and recruit new members online. People thought they were going to a party, not a cult initiation. Every time I think about that night, I remember standing barefoot people in that circle, holding those metal cups, smiling like it was some kind of celebration, and how easily it all looked normal until it didn't. Now when someone tells me they know a secret place, I just say no. It started normal. Just coffee after work, nothing fancy. Her name was Kayla. We matched on Hinge 2 weeks before, and she was the one who kept the conversation going. She was funny, kind of sarcastic, and asked a lot of questions that felt personal, but not too weird at first. Stuff like how I handle stress, if I've ever lied to someone close, what I'd do if someone tested me. I thought it was her way of flirting, but she said once that she liked testing loyalty. I thought she meant emotionally, like a joke about trust. She picked the cafe, a quiet one tucked behind a bookstore. When I walked in, she was already there, sitting near the back with her phone flat on the table, screen down. She smiled a big when she saw me stood up, hugged me quickly, and sat back down like she'd been waiting for something. She had this strange mix of excitement and control in her expression, like she'd planned the whole thing out already. The first 15 minutes were fine. We talked about work, random stuff, and travel plans. She was really animated, leaning forward, keeping eye contact. But every few minutes, she'd check her watch and glance toward the cafe entrance. The first time, I didn't notice. The third time, I asked if she was expecting someone. She said no, she just liked sitting where she could see who was coming. That made me laugh awkwardly, but she didn't laugh back. She just nodded like she made a point. Then she started talking about honesty, how people don't tell the truth unless they're pressured. She said she could always tell when someone was hiding something. I said I had nothing to hide. She smiled again, small this time, like she didn't believe me. Then it got weird. About half an hour in, 3 men in dark suits walked into the cafe. They didn't order anything. They just scanned the room and headed straight toward our table. Everyone else went quiet for a second. I thought they were bodyguards or maybe some kind of prank. Kayla didn't even flinch. She just straightened up and folded her hands. One of the men asked my name. I said yes, confused, and before I could ask what was going on, they flashed badges. They said they were responding to a report filed earlier in the day about a potential threat. My brain froze. I looked at Kayla, waiting for her to explain, but she stayed silent. The man said someone had used my full name, date of birth, and phone number to file a security complaint with the local office. My stomach dropped. I barely even understood what that meant. He said the report claimed I'd been stalking someone and using fake accounts to track their location. They had my name on the report, my picture printed out on paper. Everyone in the cafe was staring now. Kayla leaned back in her seat like she was watching a movie. I told the men there had to be a mistake, but they weren't joking. They started asking where I'd been the past few days, if I knew a woman named Kayla. When I said she was sitting right there, it looked at her, then back at me. She smiled politely and said she'd never met me before today. My heart dropped straight into my stomach. She said she'd agreed to meet because she wanted to see if it was really him. That's when it hit me. She'd set this up. The men started asking her if she felt safe, and she nodded slightly but didn't speak much. I kept trying to explain, but every time I did, one of them told me to lower my voice. I could feel everyone's eyes burning into me. She looked almost proud, like she'd accomplished something. After a few minutes of tense silence, one of the men asked if they could check my ID. I gave it to them, hands shaking. They stepped aside, looked at each other, then said they'd be verifying some information. One of them stepped outside to make a call. I turned to Kayla again, trying to get her to tell the truth. She just said quietly that she needed to know if I could handle pressure. That's when I realized the testing loyalty thing wasn't a joke. She'd literally filed a false report to see how I'd react when confronted. It wasn't about loyalty. It was about control. After what felt like an hour, the man who left came back. He said the report had been filed online using a prepaid device, and the listed contact number didn't match mine. But my full details were accurate, including where I worked. He asked how that could happen. I said I didn't know. I looked at Kayla again, and she finally looked nervous. They told me I could go, but warned that if anything came up again, they'd be back. I just sat there, stunned. The three men left without saying much else. The cafe slowly went back to normal. I couldn't even move. Kayla was still calm, sipping her drink. I asked her why she did that. She said people only show who they really are when they're pushed to the edge. She said she didn't trust dating apps anymore because everyone lies. So she'd come up with her own way of filtering people, stress testing. I just stared at her. She said I passed because I didn't walk out or yell. I left without saying anything else. I didn't even care about the stairs anymore. I went straight to my car and sat there for 10 minutes trying to calm down. My phone buzzed twice. It was her. 2 messages. One said, "You did really well." The other said, "Don't take it personally." I blocked her immediately. A few days later, I got a call from an unknown number. I didn't answer. Then I got an email from the same address the police had mentioned. It just said, "Test completed" in the subject line and nothing in the body. I went to the local station to file a report about it. The officer looked tired when I told him what happened. He said I wasn't the first person to come in with a story like that. Apparently, she'd done similar things to other men from Hinge and Bumble, filing fake reports and claiming she was verifying her security instincts. They tried to track her down, but she kept changing names and phone numbers. I haven't used a dating app since. Every time I get a random call or email, I still wonder if it's her. Now when someone says they want to test loyalty, I don't even reply. He said he liked quiet places. That's how he convinced me to meet him at the lake. His name was Dylan. We've been talking on Hinge for a week, mostly harmless conversation, music, food, travel, random memes. He didn't seem weird, just kind of reserved. When he asked if I wanted to get some air and watch the water, it sounded peaceful. I didn't expect it to be pitch black or freezing that night. The drive out there was longer than I thought. He sent a location pin, not an address, and when I pulled up, I realized it wasn't a public park. It was one of those half-forgotten spots where the road just ends at the water. No lights, no benches, just gravel and a narrow trail that wrapped around the lake. His car was already there, parked by the edge. He waved when I pulled in. The first thing I noticed was how calm he looked standing there, hands in his jacket pockets, like he'd been waiting for hours and didn't mind. The air smelled like cold mud and trees. There was mist hovering just above the water, and the moon was barely bright enough to make out the surface. We started walking along the trail. It was quiet except for the crunch of gravel under our shoes. He talked softly, asking random questions about family, old relationships, my job. Normal stuff, but his tone never changed. It was steady, emotionless. Every time I tried to lighten the mood, he'd just nod and ask something new. After a while, I asked why he liked this place so much. He said it was peaceful, that not many people came out here anymore. I asked if he used to come with friends, and he said no, only people he trusted. That word trusted stuck in my head for some reason. We stopped near a small dock that jutted out into the lake. It creaked when we stepped on it. I remember the reflection of the moon on the water. It looked distorted, like the ripples were pulling it apart. He sat down at the edge, motioning for me to do the same. I did, mostly to not make things awkward. For a while, we just sat there in silence. Then faintly, I noticed lights across the water. Flashing ones. Blue and white. At first, I thought it was a car, but the lights moved slowly, sweeping side to side. He saw them too. His body tensed, but he didn't say anything. The sound came next, a low mechanical hum, then voices. I could see them clearly now. People on a small rescue boat, shining flashlights into the water. Another beam came from the shore opposite us. I thought maybe someone was hurt or lost. Dylan stayed silent. I asked what was happening, but he didn't answer right away. He just stared at the lights like he knew exactly what they were doing. Then he said it was probably a recovery operation. I asked what he meant, and he said sometimes divers come out late to look for missing people. His tone was so casual it didn't sound real. The air felt heavier after that. I could hear the water splashing as the boat moved closer to the center. Someone yelled something I couldn't make out. Then one of the beams of light swept across our side of the lake right over at us. I flinched, but he didn't move. One of the voices shouted again. I couldn't see their faces, but I could tell they'd found something. A few seconds later, another light flicked on near the dock, a car headlight. A police SUV was parked up on the trail. 2 officers stepped out, talking on radios. I stood up immediately, heart racing. I asked if we should go, and he told me to relax, but his face looked off now, pale, tense, focused. One of the officers pointed toward us. I panicked for no reason, thinking maybe we weren't supposed to be there. I told him I was leaving. That's when he finally stood up too. He said we should wait, said leaving would look bad. I didn't understand what he meant until one of the officers started walking our way, shining a flashlight ahead of him. I froze, thinking maybe it was about parking or trespassing. But then the officer asked if we'd seen anyone near the water earlier. Dylan answered before I could. He said no, that we just arrived. The officer nodded, glanced at me, and then back at him. He told us they were investigating a missing person case. That's when he said the name. I didn't recognize it at first. Then he said the person had been missing for 3 days and was last seen near this lake. He handed Dylan a small printed photo. Dylan took it like he'd been expecting it. The officer turned to me and asked if I recognized the girl. I looked down at the photo and felt my stomach drop. It looked exactly like me. Same hair color, same jawline, even the same jacket. It wasn't me, but it looked like it could have been my twin. The officer asked if I was okay. I nodded, but my body was shaking. Dylan didn't react at all. He just stared at the picture longer than anyone should. I kept waiting for him to say something, but he just held it, eyes locked on it like it meant something to him. The officer said they'd be continuing the search through the night and walked back toward the car. Dylan stayed still for a few seconds, then quietly folded the photo and put it in his pocket. I wanted to scream at him for doing that, but I couldn't even think straight. I asked why he took it, and he said he just wanted to remember. I backed away slowly, pretending I had to take a call. I walked toward my car as fast as I could without running. When I looked back, he was still by the dock, staring out at the water with his hands in his pockets. The police lights reflected across the lake, flashing blue on his face. I got in the car, locked the doors, and drove off without turning my headlights on for the first few seconds. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely grip the wheel. Later that night, I couldn't stop thinking about the photo. I searched the name the officer said. She was real. A woman in her mid-20s who'd gone missing after meeting someone from a dating app. The article said she was last seen heading toward that same lake to meet a guy named Dylan. I stared at my screen for minutes, reading the description again and again. It was the same person I'd just been sitting beside. I reported it the next morning. The police said they'd already been looking for him, that he deleted every trace of his online profiles the day before I met him. I showed them the messages, but his account was gone. They told me to stay cautious, that he might reach out again. He never did. But every time I see a lake now, I think about those flashlight beams cutting through the dark, and the photo that looked just like me. She was the kind of person who made you feel comfortable fast. Her name was Layla, and she had this calm way of talking that made everything sound normal. We matched on Hinge, talked for about a week, and she invited me over for dinner at her place. She said she loved cooking and wanted to try out a new pasta recipe. Normally, I wouldn't go to someone's house that soon, but she sent pictures of the food she'd made before and seemed chill. Her place was on the edge of town, one of those small semi-detached houses near the motorway. I got there around 7. She opened the door wearing a baggy sweater and jeans, hair tied back, and a smell of garlic and tomato sauce filled the hallway. It all felt casual and friendly. We sat down in the living room while she finished cooking. The house looked lived in, blankets on the sofa, plants near the window, family photos on a shelf. One photo caught my eye. It showed her with an older man, maybe in his 40s, standing next to a car. I asked who it was. She smiled and said it was her uncle, that he helped her with the house sometimes. Dinner was good, basic but nice. She talked a lot, mostly about work and how she'd been through a weird year. Somewhere in the middle of it, she said her uncle might stop by later to pick something up. I didn't think twice. I just said sure. Around 9, someone knocked. She jumped up quickly, almost too fast, and said that must be him. I stayed seated while she opened the door. A tall man walked in, broad shoulders, short beard, black hoodie. He looked a little too young to be her uncle, maybe late 30s. He nodded at me, but didn't smile. She introduced him by name, then said she'd go grab something from upstairs. The second she left, the man sat down in the chair across from me. No small talk, no casual jokes, just silence. He looked around the room, then looked straight at me. The way he stared made my chest tighten. It wasn't curious, it was measuring. After about 30 seconds, he leaned forward and asked how I knew her. I said we'd met on Hinge. He nodded slowly like he already knew that. Then he said he was just making sure she was safe. His tone was calm, but his eyes weren't. I started to feel cornered. I stood up and said I was about to leave anyway, but before I could move, she came back down the stairs. She looked completely calm, holding 2 mugs of tea. She handed one to me and one to him. Then she said something that made my stomach twist. She told him to start recording. He pulled out his phone and pointed it at me. I asked what was going on, but neither of them answered. She sat next to him on the couch and crossed her legs like this was something rehearsed. Then she said they'd been running a little project. She said they expose people online for bad behavior. I was confused until she said they filmed their dates and post clips of them acting inappropriate. I said I hadn't done anything. She smiled and said they could make it look like I did. My mouth went dry. She told me to sit back down. I didn't. I backed for the door, but the man stood up, blocking the way. His phone was still recording. She started asking me random questions, where I worked, who I lived with, how much I made. I refused to answer, but she said she already had my info from my Hinge profile and screenshots of our messages. That's when I realized they'd planned this. The photos on her profile, the house, the dinner, it was all bait. She said they could use the footage to make it look like I'd said or done something bad. She mentioned a name, some guy they'd done this to before, and said he paid them to take the video down. My heart was pounding. I told her this was blackmail. She just smiled again and said people call it different things. I told them I was leaving. She told me I wasn't. The man moved closer, phone still aimed at me. He wasn't yelling, just staring like he was waiting for me to do something stupid. I didn't. I kept my voice low and said I was going to call the police. That made her laugh. She said I wouldn't, because I wouldn't want my face online if things got messy. I knew I couldn't fight both of them, so I went for calm. I said I needed to step outside to make a call. She said fine, but he followed me to the door. The moment I stepped out, I walked fast toward my car, keys already in hand. He called out behind me, but I didn't look back. I jumped in, locked the doors, and drove off. My hands were shaking the entire time. When I got home, I blocked her everywhere and reported the profile to Hinge. The next morning, I tried searching her name online. Nothing came up except an old local Facebook page with her face and a different last name. I scrolled through the comments and found one from a guy saying she and her husband had scammed him out of money. He said they'd filmed him at their house and tried to extort him for $500, threatening to send the video to his employer. That confirmed everything. The uncle wasn't her uncle at all. He was her husband. I called the police and told them everything. They asked for her profile info and the address. I gave them what I remembered. A few days later, they called back and said the house was empty. The neighbors told them the couple had moved out weeks before. Apparently, the property was a short-term rental they'd been using under fake names. I haven't heard anything since. Hinge confirmed they banned her account, but I know they'll probably just make another one. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I hadn't left fast. If I'd panicked or said something they could twist on camera. The calm way they acted scared me more than if they'd yelled. It was like they'd done it many times before. Now, whenever someone mentions meeting at their house, I just say no. Doesn't matter how normal they seem. I think about that man's blank face, the phone pointed at me, and her voice calling it a project. I still have her number saved under a fake name in case the police ever need it. I don't think they'll find her, though. People like that move too easily. I deleted Hinge the next day. I haven't re-downloaded it since. It started off casual like any other Hinge meetup. His name was Nate. We'd been talking for a few days, mostly about music, movies, random stuff. He wasn't super talkative, but seemed harmless enough. He said he wanted to go for a late-night drive, said it was peaceful, and he liked talking in the car more than sitting in some loud bar. I figured why not. He picked me up around 10 p.m., I remember, because I almost canceled last minute since it was cold and I was tired. The car was a silver Honda, kind of old but clean inside. He smiled when I got in, but he looked distracted, like his mind was somewhere else. His knee was bouncing the entire time, and he kept tapping his fingers on the steering wheel even before we started driving. He said he was just tired from work. I believed him at first. We drove through quiet streets, no music, just the sound of the engine and streetlights flicking past. I tried making small talk, asked what he did for work, what part of the city he lived in, but he gave really short answers. He said he worked in delivery, sometimes late hours. Then he said he didn't like staying in one place too long. After maybe 15 minutes, he turned down a long road that led out of town, near the industrial area. I started feeling uneasy. It was late, no other cars, no houses around. I asked where we were going, and he said he wanted to stop somewhere quiet by the river. I didn't like how vague that sounded. That's when he sighed and said something I didn't expect. He said he borrowed the car. I laughed awkwardly, thinking he meant from a friend or family member, but he didn't smile. He kept his eyes on the road and said he was just using it for a while. My stomach dropped. I asked what he meant, and he said he'd explain later. He looked tense, eyes darting between the mirrors every few seconds like he was expecting someone to follow us. I realized the car didn't have any personal stuff inside. No air freshener, no keychains, nothing. It felt too empty, too clean. I wanted to ask more, but his hands were gripping the wheel so tight that his knuckles were white. He kept glancing behind us every few seconds. Then he said something that made my heart race. He told me if anything happened, I should just stay quiet. That's when I knew I needed to get out of that car. I told him to pull over, that I felt sick. He hesitated and slowed down near a gas station on the side of the road. The second he stopped, I unbuckled and said I'd be right back. He didn't argue. He just nodded, still looking in the mirror. I got out, walked inside the gas station, and pretended to use the restroom. My hands were shaking the whole time. When I came back out, I saw him still parked there, engine idling, eyes glued to the rearview mirror. That's when I saw the blue and red lights in the distance, a police car. It was driving toward us, slow but steady. Nate's face went pale. He muttered something under his breath and suddenly turned off the engine. He jumped out of the car barefoot. I hadn't even noticed he wasn't wearing shoes, and started running across the empty lot. The cops pulled in right after. One officer jumped out and shouted for him to stop. Nate didn't even look back. He sprinted toward the woods behind the gas station, feet slapping against the gravel. The other officer ran after him while the first one came up to me. I told him I didn't know what was going on, that I'd met the guy online and didn't even know his last name. The officer looked at me like he half believed it, but told me to stay put. They called for backup and started searching the woods with flashlights. It turned out the car wasn't his. It wasn't borrowed either. It had been stolen earlier that evening from a parking lot downtown. The owner had left the keys inside for a few minutes while picking up food, and Nate had taken it. They said he was known to them already for similar things: petty theft, trespassing, weird online scams. I told them everything I could remember, his name, his description, where he said he worked, even the app we met on. They wrote it all down. One of the officers said I was lucky. They'd been tracking the car for about half an hour, already using a signal from a traffic camera. They didn't find him that night. They found his shoes, though, left in the backseat. The officer said it looked like he'd been sleeping in the car before picking me up. I got a ride home in the patrol car. The whole way, I kept replaying everything in my head, how quiet he'd been, how he kept checking the mirrors, how he said he didn't stay in one place too long. I deleted the app as soon as I got home. The next morning, I looked up his name again just to see if anything came up. A local article mentioned someone with the same name being caught near the train tracks a few towns over. He tried to board a freight train barefoot, carrying a duffel bag. The article said he'd been arrested and taken in for questioning about multiple stolen vehicles. I never found out what he was planning that night. Maybe he was just running from something, maybe worse. But what still gets me is how calm he looked when I first met him, like he'd done it before. Like picking people up in stolen cars was just something normal to him. Now, whenever someone offers to drive for a first date, I always say no. I don't care how safe they seem. I still think about those flashing lights behind us and him bolting out of the car barefoot, disappearing into the dark. I met her on Hinge on a random weekday night. Her name was Tessa. She had this mysterious vibe in her profile, short captions, movie photos, and one weird prompt that said, "I like people who don't record everything." I thought she meant it in the social media sense, like those people who are always filming meals or taking selfies. I didn't think much of it. She wanted to meet quickly, like 2 days after we matched. She picked the place too, some mid-range restaurant downtown that had outdoor seating. It looked normal online, a bit fancy, but not overly expensive. She said she'd already been there a few times and liked the atmosphere. When I showed up, she was already sitting outside at a corner table. She looked exactly like her photos. Dark hair, pale skin, sharp eyes, but something about her posture threw me off. She was sitting too still, both hands resting flat on the table, not scrolling or texting, just staring at the streak. When she noticed me, she smiled, stood up, and hugged me, but it felt rehearsed, like she was acting out something she'd done before. We sat down, and before I could even say anything, she leaned forward and asked if my phone was recording. I laughed, thinking she was joking, but she didn't smile back. She asked again, slower this time, watching my face. I told her no, obviously, but she asked me to show her. I pulled out my phone, unlocked it, and showed her my home screen. She nodded, but I could tell she still didn't believe me. She kept glancing at the phone like it might start recording on its own. She said people record her all the time without her consent, that she can tell when it's happening because the air feels charged. I didn't know what to say to that, so I just nodded and tried to change the topic. She asked if I wanted to order drinks. She waved over a waiter before I could even look at the menu. She ordered for both of us, a house cocktail for her and the same for me. The waiter didn't write anything down. He just looked at her for a second, then looked at me, and I swear at his face change, like he recognized her. When he walked off, she asked again if I'd ever recorded someone without permission. I said no, but she kept pressing. She said everyone lies about it, that even people who think they're decent have done it once. I started feeling uncomfortable. Her eyes didn't move. They were locked on mine the entire time, unblinking. The drinks came fast. 2 tall glasses with orange slices and ice. The waiter set them down quietly, but when he placed mine, he slid a folded napkin under it. I thought it was a receipt at first, but when she looked away for a second, I glanced down. It said, "She's banned here. Don't drink what she ordered you." I froze. I didn't know how to react. I folded the napkin back up and pretended nothing happened. She lifted her glass and told me to try it, saying it was her favorite thing ever. I told her I'd wait a bit since I'd eaten before coming. She looked annoyed, like I'd insulted her. She said she wanted to talk somewhere quieter after. I said we could walk around after the drinks. She nodded, but she kept staring at my glass, waiting. I picked it up once, pretending to take a sip, but didn't. She smiled like she'd won something. The waiter came back pretending to check on us. When he leaned close to grab an empty plate from another table, he whispered near my shoulder, "Don't finish your drink. Get up slowly and leave." That's when I noticed he was sweating. His hand was shaking slightly as he took the plate. He didn't look at her at all. I glanced around. 2 other staff members were near the door, talking quietly, watching our table. Tessa didn't notice. She was too focused on me, asking weirdly specific questions again. How many people I live with if I sleep with my phone near my head, if I ever feel like my thoughts are being transmitted. I told her I needed to use the restroom. She said fine, but I could tell she didn't like it. She watched me walk inside, her eyes following me the whole way. Inside, the waiter was waiting near the bar. He told me she wasn't supposed to be there, that she'd been banned months ago for harassing customers and staff. Apparently, she used to come in pretending to be on dates, filming people secretly, then editing the videos to make it look like they'd done something awful. She'd post them online under fake names. The staff had caught her once mixing something into a drink she'd ordered for someone. They didn't press charges because the guy never came forward, but they banned her on the spot. He said they didn't expect her to come back, and when she did, they recognized her immediately. I asked what I should do, and he told me to leave quietly. He said he'd handle it. When I stepped outside again, she was scrolling on her phone, frowning. She looked up fast and asked where my drink was. I told her I left it inside by mistake. She stared at me for a long time, like she was trying to decide if I was lying. Then, out of nowhere, she smiled again and said she wasn't feeling well. She stood up and said she had to go, that it was nice meeting me. No handshake, no hug, just a quick turn and walk down the street. I didn't move until she was gone. When I went back inside, the waiter was wiping the table she'd been sitting at. He showed me her glass. The rim had this faint white residue on it, like powder. He didn't know what it was, but they were going to call the police just in case. I left soon after, hands shaking the whole walk to my car. Later that night, I checked Hinge again. Her profile was gone, completely deleted. I googled her first name and found a Reddit thread from someone describing a woman who used dating apps to catch liars. Apparently, she pretended to be filming social experiments, but was really just setting people up to record reactions and edit them into fake confession clips. The post had a photo attached. It was her. I still don't know what was in that drink, but every time I go out now, I order for myself, and I never let anyone else pick. He seemed smart at first. One of those guys who sounded confident without trying too hard. His name was Owen, and we matched on Hinge after he sent a message about one of my photos. He said I looked like someone who noticed small details. The way he said it made me curious, so I replied. He kept saying strange things like that, about instincts, reading people, testing behavior. He said it was part of his personal research. I thought he meant psychology or something harmless. He wanted to meet in a restaurant near the river. It was a calm spot, not too crowded. I showed up a little early and texted that I grabbed a table. He replied saying he was already inside, watching me walk in. I thought he was joking until I saw him at a booth near the back, smiling like he'd been waiting for me to notice him first. He was polite at first, asked about my day, complimented the place, normal stuff. But there was this strange rhythm to the conversation. Every few minutes, he'd tilt his head like he was studying me. Then he'd make a comment like, interesting reaction, or I knew you'd say that. It wasn't playful. It was like I was part of an experiment. When I asked what he meant by testing people's instincts, he leaned forward and said he liked to see what people do under pressure. He said he created small social situations just to watch how others responded. I laughed awkwardly, thinking he was being dramatic, but he didn't laugh back. He said he tested almost everyone he met, friends, coworkers, even dates. He said he learned more about people that way than through regular conversations. I tried changing the subject, but he kept circling back to it. He said most people don't really know themselves until they're in the middle of something unexpected. I asked if that ever got him in trouble. He smiled and said, not yet. That should have been the moment I left, but I stayed because curiosity got the better of me. He had this unnerving calmness, like he knew something I didn't. Halfway through the meal, he started glancing at the door every few seconds. I thought maybe he was nervous or waiting for someone. Then he asked if I'd ever been in a place during an emergency. I said no. He nodded slowly and said he liked to see how people handled sudden panic. I didn't even have time to respond before he stood up and said he needed to make a call. He walked out toward the restroom hallway, phone in hand. I sat there awkwardly, checking my own messages. About 5 minutes later, I noticed two staff members whispering near the bar. One of them was on the phone. The other kept glancing toward the door. Then a couple sitting nearby got up and walked out fast. I didn't know what was happening, but the atmosphere changed instantly. Everyone looked tense. A minute later, I decided to go to the restroom before things got weirder. As soon as I stepped into the hallway, two uniformed police officers were standing by the exit. They looked right at me and asked if I was alone. I told them I was there with someone named Owen. Their faces changed. One of them asked where he was. I said he went to make a call. The other officer told me to step aside. That's when I saw him, walking calmly out of the restroom area, phone still in his hand. The officers moved toward him immediately. He didn't resist. He just smiled at me as they stopped him. They asked if he'd made a call to emergency services from inside the restaurant. He said maybe. They said someone had reported a bomb threat from that location, traced back to a number registered under his name. Everything around me froze. The staff started quietly evacuating people from the dining area. The police cuffed him right there in the hallway. He didn't argue or deny it. He just kept repeating that he was testing the response time. One officer asked how many times he'd done this before, and he said enough to gather data. They let him outside while I stood there in shock. One of the officers came back a few minutes later and asked me questions: how I knew him, what we talked about, if he'd said anything before leaving the table. I told him everything, including the weird stuff about testing people's instincts. The officer nodded like it wasn't the first time he'd heard that. Apparently, he'd been doing this for months, calling in fake threats at restaurants, hotels, and public events just to watch how people reacted when the police showed up. He used burner phones sometimes, but this time he used one linked to his own account. They said he filmed reactions too, hiding his phone to record the chaos, then upload the footage online under anonymous usernames. I sat outside while they searched his bag. They found multiple phones, each labeled with a piece of tape. Crowd 1. Group study. Control. It didn't even sound real. The police said some of the footage had already been uploaded to a forum where people discussed social psychology experiments. He called it Project Instinct. When they drove him away, he looked completely calm, like it was all part of his plan. He didn't even look embarrassed, just satisfied. The officers took my statement and said I might need to give a follow-up if they confirmed he recorded me too. That thought made me sick. I hadn't noticed him filming, but he'd been on his phone several times during dinner. When I finally got home, I searched his name online. Nothing came up. But then, when I looked for Project Instinct, I found threads on obscure forums talking about a guy who staged fake emergencies. Some users defended him, saying it was performance art. Others said he was dangerous, that he once caused an entire building evacuation over a fake threat just to measure crowd dynamics. A few days later, I read a short local article saying a man had been arrested for multiple counts of false emergency reporting. It didn't use his name, but the details matched. He'd apparently done it in 5 different cities. What stuck with me most was that moment when he smiled at me while being cuffed, like I passed his test somehow. I deleted my Hinge account the same night. I couldn't stop thinking about how normal he seemed at first, how easily someone can turn curiosity into control. I don't know if he's in jail now or out on bail, but every time I hear sirens near a restaurant, I think of him sitting across from me, talking about testing instincts. She said she was a behavioral researcher. That was literally the first thing she told me on Hinge. Her profile was clean, no random selfies, just plain photos of her sitting at a desk, writing notes, holding a mug, looking serious. Her bio said she studied human response to everyday tasks. It sounded boring but harmless, and she talked in this really calm, professional tone that made her seem smart. We talked for a few days. Her messages were short, direct, almost robotic. She never used emojis or slang, just full sentences. I figured she was just one of those overly focused, science-type people. She asked if I'd be open to meeting somewhere quiet and controlled. I asked what that meant, and she said a small restaurant would do. She picked the place, a minimalist cafe tucked between an office block and a bookstore. When I arrived, she was already sitting there with a small tripod set up next to the table. It wasn't a big one, just one of those flexible phone stands, but still it looked strange in the middle of a cafe. She stood up when she saw me, smiled politely, and introduced herself like we were in a meeting instead of a date. The first weird thing was how she barely talked about herself. She asked me questions nonstop. What foods I liked, if I usually finished meals, if I ever felt uncomfortable being watched. I joked about it, thinking she was just awkward, but she wrote every answer down in a little notebook. When the waiter came over, she ordered for both of us, then adjusted the camera so it pointed straight at my face. I asked why she was recording, and she said it was part of her research on human eating habits. She said she collected footage of people eating in natural settings. I laughed it off, thinking she was exaggerating her job, but she stayed completely serious. She said I could consent verbally, and that was enough for academic purposes. I didn't want to seem paranoid, so I said fine, that the whole thing felt wrong. The camera light blinked red every few seconds, reminding me that it was still on. She watched me closely while I ate, not even touching her own plate. She'd nod sometimes and make small notes. It wasn't like a date at all. It was like being observed in a lab. I tried to lighten the mood, but she didn't respond much. She kept focusing on how I cut the food, how fast I chewed, even which hand I used to pick up the drink. Halfway through, she started asking odd questions. She asked if I ever felt like people around me copied my behavior. She asked if I believed humans acted differently when they knew they were being studied. I said, yeah, probably, since everyone gets self-conscious. She smiled, wrote something down, and said I was self-aware enough for classification. That phrase stuck in my head. When I asked what kind of classification she meant, she said she'd tell me after she processed the data. The waiter came over quietly and set down another napkin. When she wasn't looking, I noticed a line written in pen, "Stay calm, police on the way." I froze. I didn't even know how to react. I looked around, and one of the cafe staff was standing near the counter, watching our table carefully. My heart was pounding so hard I could barely think. She noticed me glance at the napkin and then asked what I was looking at. I said nothing, just wiped my hands with it and pretended to check my phone. She leaned in closer and said phones distract from authentic behavior. Then she moved the camera closer, pushing it right beside my plate. The air in the cafe felt heavy. Everyone around us was pretending not to stare. Then the front door opened, and 2 police officers walked in. They went straight to the counter, talked briefly with the staff, and one of them started walking toward our table. She didn't even turn around. She just said, "They always interfere." The officer asked her to step outside. She calmly said we were in the middle of the study. He repeated himself. She sighed and picked up her notebook and camera, acting like she was inconvenienced. As she stood, she looked at me and said I was one of the more natural subjects. I didn't respond. The officer guided her out while the others stayed behind to talk to the staff. After a few minutes, one of the waiters came over and said it was safe now. I asked what was going on, and he said she wasn't a researcher. She'd been coming to cafes and restaurants for months, filming strangers without permission and posting the footage on a private website. She called it the human study. People online would watch and comment on the recordings, rating the reactions of her subjects. Some of the clips had been sold to underground sites that pay for unfiltered behavioral footage. Apparently, she'd been reported multiple times, but by the time police arrived, she was always gone. That day, the staff recognized her from a warning the police had circulated. They called it in as soon as she started filming again. The officer came back in after a while to take my statement. He asked if she offered me anything, touched me, or made threats. I said no, just filmed me eating and took notes. He said that fit her usual pattern. She'd gain someone's trust, get them to consent verbally, then use the footage for her research. Some clips even had fake titles claiming to show unprovoked human reactions under surveillance. They found multiple drives and notebooks in her bag, each labeled with names, dates, and restaurant details. One folder on her computer, they said, contained hundreds of short clips with numbers instead of names. She'd built a whole system for categorizing people by how they reacted under observation. When I read an article about it the next day, it barely sounded real. The news said she'd been working under the alias Dr. Lane, even though she wasn't affiliated with any university. She'd studied psychology for a bit, but got expelled years ago for conducting unauthorized tests. After that, she started her own field work, filming people without consent to build what she called a living data set. I still can't eat in public without thinking about that red recording light blinking at me. I keep checking corners of restaurants now, scanning for phones pointed my way. The weirdest part is that none of it felt threatening while it was happening. She wasn't loud or aggressive. She just treated me like data. When I think about it now, I realize she probably didn't even see me as a person. Just another file to label, another reaction to record. I deleted Hinge right after. I still catch myself looking for cameras whenever I sit down anywhere. He messaged me one night saying he loved astronomy. His name was Liam. His profile said he worked in tech, loved drones, and spent weekends chasing constellations. The photos matched the vibe: city skyline shots, glowing rooftops, close-ups of stars through telescopes. He looked normal, maybe a bit too polished, but nothing off-putting. He invited me to his rooftop to see the stars. Said he had an amazing view of the city's skyline and a telescope set up for stargazing. It sounded harmless and kind of romantic in a quiet way. He sent the building address, and when I Googled it, it was a big apartment complex with an open rooftop deck, public enough to feel safe. I got there around 9 p.m. The city was buzzing, lights everywhere, that low hum of cars passing. He met me in the lobby, wearing a hoodie and holding a controller with antennas sticking out. I thought it was for the telescope. He smiled, but his eyes looked tired, like he hadn't slept in a while. We went up the elevator, and when the doors opened, the air hit me. It was cooler up there, with a wide-open view of the skyline. He'd set up blankets in a small folding chair, and sure enough, a big telescope stood near the edge. The setup actually looked nice, almost too perfect. He started talking fast, saying he liked to test different lenses and record constellations. His hands moved constantly, adjusting dials, checking his phone, looking up at the sky. He told me to sit down while he grabbed something from a case near the railing. That's when I noticed a small drone resting there, sleek, black, with a camera attached underneath. He said it helped him get wide shots. I thought he meant of the stars, but it was pointed toward the nearby apartment buildings, not the sky. He powered it on, and the propeller spun quietly. He lifted it off the railing, guiding it with his controller. The drone rose slowly, humming over our heads, red and green lights flashing. He told me to watch the sky, but I couldn't stop looking at the drone. It hovered, then drifted sideways toward a building across the street. I thought maybe he was just flying it around for fun, but it stopped right outside a window. It hovered there for a few seconds, steady like it was filming something. I said something about it being too close to the apartments. He didn't respond. He was focused on the controller, eyes locked on the small screen attached to it. I realized he was watching a live feed. I leaned slightly and saw a glimpse of what looked like someone's living room. I stepped back immediately. He noticed me looking and said it was just testing angles. I told him it was illegal to film people in their homes, and he laughed softly, saying no one ever notices. That's when I started getting nervous. He moved the drone again, this time toward another window lower down. The feed flickered. He zoomed in on something, but I couldn't see what. His face changed, focused, almost obsessed. I said I didn't think this was about astronomy anymore. He ignored me completely. Then the sound hit, a deep thudding from above, growing louder. A police helicopter. Its searchlight swept across the city, getting closer. He froze for a second, and frantically tried to bring the drone down. The helicopter circled overhead, and suddenly the bright spotlight cut through the air, flooding the rooftop. It landed right on us. I could barely see. The sound was deafening. He started shouting that it wasn't what it looked like, fumbling with the controller. The drone wobbled in the air, spinning sideways. I backed away as officers' voices came through a loudspeaker, ordering him to stay still. He panicked and ran to grab the drone, but it hit the railing and crashed to the ground, propellers still spinning. The helicopter light followed him as he tried to cover it with his foot, like hiding it would make a difference. Within seconds, the rooftop door burst open. 2 officers came up with flashlights and shouted for him to back away. I stood frozen near the chairs, hands shaking. He didn't move at first. Then when they stepped closer, he dropped the controller and held his hands up. They cuffed him right there, still under the blinding spotlight. One of the officers turned to me and asked if I was with him. I said we'd met on Hinge and that he said we were stargazing. The officer just sighed and told me to step back. Turns out he'd been under investigation for weeks. Neighbors had reported a drone hovering outside their windows late at night, sometimes for hours. The police had tracked the drone's signal to his building, but could never catch him in the act. They'd been waiting for him to use it again, and I just happened to be there when he did. They searched his rooftop setup. In his bag, they found multiple memory cards labeled with building names and apartment numbers. The telescope wasn't even real. It was just a shell covering another camera. When they took him away, he looked at me once and said quietly, "They would have loved your face on camera." That sentence made my stomach turn. One of the officers escorted me downstairs. He said the guy had dozens of videos uploaded under fake accounts, using titles like City Nights and Private Views. He claimed they were urban studies, but they were just footage of people in their homes. Some videos had been sold online. They asked me to give a statement, so I stayed for an hour answering questions. When I finally got back home, I deleted Hinge immediately. I couldn't sleep that night. Every time I looked out my window, I imagined a drone hovering there watching. A few days later, I saw a short article online. Man arrested for drone spying across residential towers. It mentioned the rooftop, the videos, and how police found over 400 hours of recorded footage. It didn't mention me, but I knew I'd been part of that final moment when they caught him. I still think about how calm he seemed before the light hit us. Completely normal, smiling, talking about constellations. And then how fast it all flipped. Now, whenever someone mentions stargazing, I can't even look up anymore. All I picture is that drone, floating quietly in the dark, watching someone who doesn't even know they're being watched. She looked like everything the app promised. Easy smile, soft voice, warm eyes that made you forget how awkward first dates usually feel. Her name was Aria. She was funny, confident, not too serious, not too flirty, just the right balance. We matched on a Thursday night and made plans for Saturday afternoon. She picked the cafe herself, said it had the best chai in the city. When I got there, she was already seated by the window. I remember the light hit her face in this perfect way, almost cinematic. She waved when she saw me stood up, and greeted me like we'd known each other forever. No hesitation, no weird silence, just immediate comfort. Everything felt normal. We talked about work, favorite shows, small talk that actually flowed. She laughed at the right moments, asked about my family, told stories about hers. But none of them had names, just my brother, my mom, my best friend. I didn't think about it at the time. Halfway through the date, I noticed she didn't have her phone on the table. Everyone has their phone out on first dates, even just flipped over. But hers wasn't there. I asked if she wanted to take a photo of the drinks since she'd been talking about them. She said she didn't bring her phone out much anymore because she was trying to stay off the grid. I laughed, thinking she meant social media, but she didn't laugh with me. The cafe was playing quiet music, but above the counter was a TV showing local news on mute. Every few minutes, my eyes drifted toward it. Aria noticed and teased me for being distracted, but I said I just can't help looking at screens when they're around. She smiled and said everyone does that. It's human nature. Then she started talking about the concept of identity. Not in a weird way at first, just casually. She said people spend their whole lives trying to be someone they're not. I said that's probably true for dating apps especially. She looked at me longer than she needed to and said sometimes people get good at being someone else entirely. It was a strange thing to say, but she said it so calmly that I didn't even know how to react. While she talked, my eyes flicked back to the TV again. The news had switched segments. The anchor was showing a photo of a woman under the headline Missing Person, UHEAT. I couldn't hear the words, but the photo was crystal clear. It was her. Same face, same hair, same dimples, same person sitting across from me. For a second, my brain just stopped. I kept looking from the TV to her, trying to convince myself it wasn't real. Maybe it was someone who just looked like her, but the image stayed on screen long enough for me to see her name in bold white text. It said, Aria Langford, 27, last seen 5 days ago leaving her apartment. She noticed the exact moment I saw it. Her eyes didn't flicker. She didn't panic. She just smiled slowly, like she'd been waiting for that reaction. The silence felt heavier than anything I'd ever sat through. My mouth went dry. I wanted to ask what was going on, but my voice wouldn't come up. Then she leaned slightly forward and said I must think the resemblance was crazy. I nodded, pretending to laugh, but it came out wrong. She said people tell her that all the time, that she looks like that missing girl. She said it didn't bother her anymore, that she'd gotten used to people staring. But the way she said it was off. Like she was mocking the situation, not explaining it. She changed the subject immediately, asking if I wanted dessert. I said no, and she said I should still stay a bit longer since she wasn't done with her questions. My stomach tightened. I told her I had to go soon, but she just smiled again. That's when I noticed a small bag under her chair. It was dipped, but the outline looked hard, like there was something metallic inside. She caught me glancing at it. She said it was just a camera, that she did freelance street photography. The TV was still showing her photo in the background, now with the word Wormwardy flashing at the bottom. I couldn't look at her face anymore. She was still talking about how strange people's reactions were when they thought they recognized her. She said once a guy ran straight out of a restaurant when he saw that same alert. She said it like a joke, but her tone was flat. I muttered something about needing the restroom and stood up. She didn't stop me. She just watched me walk away, eyes following the entire time. In the hallway near the bathrooms, I pulled out my phone and searched her name. The first result was the same missing person article from earlier that week. It said she'd been last seen at a local bus stop near the same neighborhood this cafe was in. No sign of foul play, no suspects. There was a number to call if anyone had seen her. I was still staring at my phone when a staff member stepped out of the kitchen and asked if I was okay. I quietly told her to look at the TV, that the woman I was sitting with looked exactly like the one in the photo. Her face went pale immediately. She nodded and told me to wait there. I saw her whisper to another staff member, who quickly picked up the phone. I went back toward the table to grab my jacket, but Ariel wasn't there anymore. Her cup was still half full, her bag gone. The chair was slightly turned like she'd left in a hurry. By the time the police arrived, she was long gone. They asked me to describe her, what she was wearing, what name she used, and what we talked about. I told them everything. They said they had a few false sightings recently. People who claimed to see her alive in public, but by the time officers got there, she'd vanish every time. They showed me another photo, a different one, from a week earlier. She looked thinner, hair tied back, but it was her. They said if it really was Aria, she might be in danger, or she might be someone pretending to be her. That night, I couldn't stop replaying her face when the photo came on the TV. That calm smile, that quiet confidence, like she wanted me to see it. A few days later, I checked the news again. The missing person alert was updated, still no trace found. But at the bottom of the article, there was a short line that chilled me completely. It said police had received reports of a woman matching her description meeting men from dating apps in different parts of the city, using her real name. They didn't say why. I never saw her again. I deleted Hinge the same day. Sometimes I think about her face under that cafe light, how she didn't flinch when I saw the photo. It felt like I was the one being studied, not her. Now, whenever I walk into a cafe and see the news on TV, I can't help but glance up, just to make sure the person sitting across from me isn't already up there too. He said he was a photographer. Not one of those fake ones either, the type that just owns a camera and takes pictures of random walls. His profile was filled with real portraits, moody lighting, perfectly framed shots of people who looked like models. His bio said he specialized in capturing raw emotion. It sounded legit. He messaged me first, said I had the kind of face people remember. It was smooth, maybe a bit cheesy, but he wasn't creepy about it. He said he'd love to take some portraits of me for fun, no pressure. I wasn't sure at first, but the more we talked, the more normal he seemed. He said he'd done hundreds of shoots, and he rented a small studio downtown where he worked. We met for coffee before the shoot, just to talk. He was polite, calm, soft-spoken. He asked about my interests, my favorite photographers, my comfort level with being photographed. Nothing weird, just professional. After half an hour, he said we could walk to the studio. It was only a few blocks away. The place looked like one of those converted warehouse spaces, old brick walls, and tall windows. There were lights, stands, and backdrops neatly folded against one side. A faint smell of paint and dust hung in the air. He unlocked the door, flicked on the lights, and everything looked normal. He showed me a few props, chairs, stools, even an old couch. He said he liked to use minimal stuff, that it helped people relax. He handed me a bottle of water and told me to sit while he adjusted the lighting. For the first few minutes, everything was fine. He moved around quietly, switching lights on and off, testing angles, adjusting reflectors. Then he asked if he could step into the back room to grab something. He said it would take a minute. When he left, the silence felt heavier. The main lights hummed softly, casting long shadows across the walls. I looked around out of boredom. There were framed photos hanging everywhere, portraits of women. They all looked serious, not smiling, just staring into the lens. The lighting was dramatic, almost cinematic. I thought they were beautiful shots at first. Then I noticed something odd. The women all looked eerily similar. Similar hair, similar clothes, similar poses. I walked closer to one of the frames and realized the background wasn't a studio wall. It looked like a hallway or an apartment. Another photo had faint police tape in the corner. My heart started to race. I stepped closer to the far wall where more photos were pinned, not framed this time. These weren't glossy prints. They were rough, like they'd been printed straight from evidence files. Some had markings in pen on the edges. Dates, names, case numbers. The faces in the photos weren't posed anymore. They were pale, still, unnatural. I froze. My brain couldn't process it at first. I thought maybe he worked with crime photography somehow, like forensics or journalism. But then I saw one image that made my knees go weak. It wasn't a professional shot. It was a police photo, the kind they take at a scene. The date was recent. And the woman looked like one of the girls in his Instagram portfolio. Before I could think of what to do, I heard footsteps coming from the back room. I quickly stepped away from the wall and sat back where I was before, pretending to scroll my phone. He walked in, carrying a new camera. His tone was the same, soft, calm, controlled. He asked if I was ready to start. I forced a smile and nodded. He positioned the camera on a tripod and told me to sit near the window. As he looked through the lens, I noticed his hands weren't steady anymore. He kept adjusting the focus, glancing at me, then at the wall behind me. I didn't know if he noticed that I'd seen the photos. He told me to tilt my head slightly and look past the camera, not into it. His voice was too calm, too rehearsed. My chest felt tight. He took a few photos, each click echoing like a countdown. Then he stepped back and said he was going to grab a different lens. He walked toward the same back room again. The second he disappeared, I stood up. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely grab my bag. I didn't even care if he heard me moving. I walked straight to the door, turned the lock, and pushed it open. Outside, the street felt painfully bright. I kept walking fast until I turned the corner and was completely out of sight from the studio. I stopped at a cafe nearby, sat down, and tried to steady my breathing. I looked up his name on my phone again. I found his photography page. It was filled with the same portraits I'd seen on the walls. But when I scrolled to the bottom, I noticed the older photos had comments turned off. The usernames that had commented years ago didn't exist anymore. Something felt wrong, so I reverse searched one of the images. It took me to an old local article, Missing Persons. The headline mentioned a woman who disappeared after agreeing to a photo shoot with a freelance photographer. The image beside it was one of the portraits from his page. I called the police immediately and told them everything, the address, his name, the photos. They asked me to stay put while a unit checked it out. Later that night, an officer called to confirm they'd found the studio. Inside, they discovered multiple photos matching active missing person cases from the last few years. They said there were other rooms behind the main space, locked with equipment that looked like a mix of photo gear and something else. They didn't tell me details, but they said he wasn't there. The back door was open. For a while, I kept getting calls from detectives for follow-up questions. They asked what he'd said, what time I arrived, what I'd seen. I told them everything. They said I was lucky that my call probably stopped something before it happened again. His social media was taken down within a few days, but every now and then, new accounts popped up using his old photos. Same style, same lighting, different names. Always posting portraits of women who looked uncomfortable, like they didn't realize the camera was still on. Sometimes I wonder if any of those photos were taken after that day. Now, whenever someone mentions being a photographer on Hinge, I scroll right past. I don't care how professional they sound. Every studio photo looks like a warning now, another face, another setup, another story waiting to be pinned on some wall somewhere. It started with a kind of match that feels too easy. Her name was Alina. She said she was into psychology and human behavior, which made her sound smart but kind of mysterious too. Her profile had only 3 photos, one at a cafe, one hiking, one blurry night shot, but there was something confident about her. Her bio said she used Hinge to find volunteers for projects. I thought it was some kind of joke, like volunteering for surveys or art photos. I didn't think she meant it literally. She messaged first, asking random but deep questions. Stuff like whether I trusted strangers or how I'd react if someone lied to me for a good reason. She said she studied patterns in trust, and people's reactions fascinated her. It didn't sound that weird at the time. People use dating apps for all sorts of social experiments now. We talked for about a week before she asked to meet. She picked a coffee shop near the station, said it was quiet and good for observation. Her wording was odd, but I figured she just liked people watching. When I got there, she was already sitting by the window, notebook open, pen in hand. She waved and smiled like she already knew me. She looked totally normal: jeans, sweater, hair tied up, glasses that made her seem academic. She said she'd been running a behavioral study and that she'd met people from apps to see how strangers reacted in real-world settings. I asked if I was part of the study. She smiled and said everyone was. At first, it felt like a harmless conversation. She asked about my job, my schedule, my favorite hangout spots. She didn't flirt much, but she listened really closely to every answer, writing short notes as I spoke. When I joked about it being an interview, she laughed and said I had the right kind of profile for what she needed. I didn't even ask what that meant. Halfway through, she said she wanted to show me something she was working on and asked if I could stop by her office sometime. I said maybe, but she said it wasn't really an office, just her workspace in the shared building. I didn't commit, but she said it was fine. She'd text details later if I wanted to come. The next morning, I got a message from her. It was short, just an address, and the words "bring your phone." Something about it made me hesitate, but curiosity won. I figured maybe she wanted help with a research app or demo. When I got there, the place looked nothing like an office. It was a rundown two-story building with different names on each door, most of them private studios. Hers was on the top floor, labeled Behavioral Analytics. I walked in, and it was just one big empty room with a few desks, a whiteboard, and several monitors showing what looked like chat logs. She was there, calm as ever, typing on one of the laptops. She greeted me like we were old friends and said she'd been analyzing how people present themselves online. She said she used Hinge to map behaviors, but that her research was expanding. She said she'd started creating controlled profiles to test reactions. It was weird, but she sounded so serious that I didn't want to interrupt. She asked me to sit down, give me a folder full of printed screenshots of conversations from different accounts. I noticed that some of the names looked familiar, people I'd seen on Hinge before. I pointed that out, but she brushed it off, saying she interviewed a lot of participants. Then she asked if she could borrow my phone for a second to sync a test. I handed it over without thinking. She opened some kind of web page, scanned a code, and said she was connecting data. When I asked what that meant, she said she'd show me later. A few minutes later, she got a phone call, stepped out of the room, and left her laptop open. I couldn't help but glance at the screen. It wasn't research data. It was a dating profile. My profile. My photo, my name, but the bio was completely different. It said I was seeking specific people for private work and included a link. My stomach dropped. I clicked the link, and it opened what looked like a message board thread. The page was full of usernames posting about volunteer meetings. My name was mentioned in several of them, along with details that matched me, my job, my city, and the cafe I usually go to. They weren't talking about research. They were talking about meetups. Before I could scroll further, I heard her footsteps coming back. I shut the laptop quickly and acted like nothing happened. She smiled and said we were done for the day. She gave me back my phone and thanked me for helping. As soon as I left, I checked my messages and noticed something new. My Hinge account had been logged out. When I tried to sign back in, it said my profile was under review. I didn't think much of it at first, but that night, I got a call from an unknown number. When I answered, a man asked if the meeting was still happening. I said he had the wrong number, but he insisted, saying Alina told him I was the new contact. I hung up immediately. 5 minutes later, another call came in and then another. I turned off my phone. The next morning, when I stepped out to go to work, 2 police cars were parked near my building. I thought it was coincidence until one of the officers approached me and said my name. He asked if I was connected to Project Volunteer. I had no idea what that was. He asked if I knew a woman named Alina. I said yes, but only through Hinge. They told me to come with them. My hands were shaking. At the station, they explained everything. She wasn't a researcher. She was running an online scam ring, pretending to recruit volunteers through dating apps. But instead of collecting data, she'd been catfishing wanted criminals, posing as women offering jobs or safe meetings, and using random innocent profiles like mine to lure them in. The police had been tracking her accounts for weeks, but they didn't realize she'd started using stolen profiles. Mine was one of them. That's why people had been calling me. They thought I was her partner. They showed me screenshots of my face on fake accounts, with bios linking to encrypted chat rooms. My phone's data was already flagged because she connected it to her server when she scanned the code earlier. I spent hours explaining that I didn't know her, that I had only met her twice. They eventually confirmed my story after checking my messages, but they said I'd been lucky. She'd vanished 2 days earlier. They didn't even know her real name. They said she'd been moving from city to city using dating apps as bait, finding people with clean records to front her fake profiles. Every time someone got too close, she'd disappear, wiping everything clean. When I read the article later that week, it described her as a social engineer who built traps for fugitives using dating platforms. It said she'd been linked to multiple cases, but was still missing. Every time I think about her now, I remember how calm she looked when she said everyone on Hinge was part of her research. She wasn't lying. He said he liked quiet places. His name was Aaron, and he didn't seem like the usual app guy. He wrote properly, full sentences, nothing pushy. His photos looked simple, one of him hiking, one at a cafe, one with a dog. He said he didn't like crowds and preferred low-key hangouts. I thought it was refreshing. We talked for a few days, normal stuff at first, then it got slightly off. He started saying things like how people were always watching him and how dating apps made it easy for strangers to track him. He said he deleted his accounts multiple times, but always came back to test the system. I thought he was just paranoid from social media stuff, but he was polite, so I ignored it. When he asked to meet, he picked an underground parking garage near downtown. I thought it was weird, but he said it was connected to a small cafe on the upper level. He said the garage was free and quiet, and we could walk up together. I almost said no, but I had seen his photos. He seemed harmless, and the area was usually busy. The day came, and I remember the weather was cold, windy, sky just starting to go dark. I texted him that I was a few minutes away, and he replied instantly, saying he was already parked and waiting near the elevators. When I drove into the garage, everything felt off immediately. It was emptier than I expected, just a few scattered cars. My GPS said the cafe entrance was upstairs, but he'd specifically told me to meet him on the second level. As soon as I pulled in, I noticed 2 cars idling near the exits. They weren't marked, just plain black sedans with tinted windows. I thought they were security or something. I parked near a column, texted him that I was there, and waited. A minute passed, then 2. No reply. When I finally got out, my footsteps echoed hard against the concrete. The place was too quiet. I looked around and didn't see him anywhere. Then I heard a voice, someone shouting in the distance. I couldn't make out the words, but it sounded sharp like an order. I froze. 2 more voices joined in, followed by the sound of doors slamming. That's when I saw the cars. The unmarked ones from earlier. It started moving slowly, blocking both exits of the garage. One pulled across the ramp behind me. The other positioned itself near the entrance. Panic hit instantly. I thought it was some kind of robbery setup or police chase. I ducked behind my car, heart pounding. Suddenly, another car screeched into view from the far side of the lot. It stopped abruptly, and Aaron stepped out. He was wearing the same jacket from his profile, holding his phone in one hand. But he wasn't looking for me. He was looking up toward the police lights that had just flicked on from one of the unmarked cars. Officers jumped out, shouting for him to put his hands up. I stayed crouched, too scared to move. One of them shouted something about a false report. Another yelled that they had eyes on me. I didn't understand any of it. Aaron turned, pointed straight at me, and yelled, "That's her." My stomach dropped. The officers moved toward me fast. One told me to stay where I was. I couldn't even speak. They surrounded both of us within seconds. One officer grabbed Aaron. Another kept a hand near his holster while looking at me. They asked my name if I knew him. I stammered yes, we met on Hinge. They exchanged looks. Then one of them said quietly, "He's been calling in reports all week." They cuffed him right there, and he started yelling that I was the stalker, that I'd been following him for days. He said I'd hacked his phone and stolen his photos. The way he said it, like he rehearsed it, was terrifying. The police asked me to show my messages with him. I handed them my phone, hands shaking. I scrolled through our chat, saw that he was the one who'd initiated everything, set the meeting, picked the location. One of them sighed and said, "He's done this before." Apparently, Aaron had a history of filing fake harassment claims. He'd pick random people online, usually women, and report them to the police as stalkers. He'd lure them to public places, wait for officers he tipped off to show up, and then act like he was the victim being confronted. They said he'd done it to 3 other people already, always through dating apps. Sometimes he'd even send fake screenshots of threats using edited conversations. He told them that I was following him for weeks, that I'd threatened to meet him in that exact garage. He even sent them photos of my car, probably pulled from the app or my social media. When the officers compared our chat history to his evidence, it didn't match. He fabricated entire conversations. They took him away quietly after that. One officer stayed back to talk to me, explaining that they'd been tracking his reports for days because something never added up. He always acted too calm during these supposed confrontations, and every suspect turned out to be someone he'd recently matched with. They said he seemed obsessed with the idea that people were spying on him, but he was the one setting everything up. I sat on the curb outside the garage for what felt like an hour, just trying to process it. My car was still parked upstairs, engine off, phone buzzing nonstop with missed messages from my friends. Later that night, a detective called to follow up. She said they'd found fake accounts linked to him, all using variations of his name and photo. On some of them, he'd been messaging himself from other profiles, building fake proof of harassment. It was all to feed this story he'd made up about being stalked. She said they'd also found folders on his laptop labeled with first names. Each one matched a woman he'd met online. Inside were screenshots, photos, sometimes addresses. My name was one of them. When I got off the call, I deleted Hinge right away. I kept thinking about how calm he'd sounded when he said he liked quiet places. It wasn't about being peaceful. It was about being alone enough to stage a scene. The next morning, I checked the news. There was a short report about a man arrested for false reporting and online harassment. No photo, just a brief mention of a 32-year-old arrested in connection to multiple staged incidents. That was him. Sometimes I think about how easily I walked into it. I hadn't done anything wrong, but I still ended up surrounded by cops, accused of being something I wasn't. Now, whenever someone says they want to meet somewhere quiet, I just block them. I don't care how normal they seem. I learned that sometimes the scariest people aren't the ones chasing you. They're the ones setting the trap and waiting for you to show up. She said she worked at a clinic. That was one of the first things she mentioned on Hinge, right under her name. Nora, 28, healthcare professional. She had that clean, calm look. Neat scrubs in one photo, tied back hair, not much makeup, and a smile that seemed professional more than friendly. Her profile didn't say much else except that she liked understanding human reactions and late-night coffee. It sounded harmless, even kind of interesting. We matched on a Sunday night. Her first message wasn't flirty. She asked if I slept well or if I struggled to relax at night. I thought it was a weird question, but she followed up saying she worked with patients who had anxiety and insomnia. I said I slept fine, just the usual stress from work. She said she liked people who were naturally resistant. I didn't even know what she meant by that. She was smart, though. Every message felt like part of some quiz I didn't know I was taking. She'd ask specific things like how I react under pressure or how often I notice details other people miss. I thought she was just trying to make conversation. She asked to meet a few days later, said she was free after her shift. We met at a small restaurant near the hospital district. She showed up still wearing her clinic badge, though she tucked it behind her sweater pretty quickly. She said it made people nervous when they saw her name and where she worked. I didn't even catch the hospital name before she flipped it. She was different from how she texted, still quiet but more confident in person. She talked a lot about her job, said she helped with patient sedation for minor procedures, monitoring vitals, managing dosages. I didn't know much about that world, so I just listened. She seemed passionate about it, almost too passionate. When the waiter came, she ordered wine right away, but said she wouldn't drink too much since she was technically on call. She encouraged me to try the house special and said she'd surprise me with a drink since she wanted to test my palate. It sounded playful, so I went with it. Everything felt normal at first. The food was good, conversation smooth. She kept asking me about my tolerance for caffeine, alcohol, pain, even how I handled dental anesthesia. I laughed it off, thinking it was just her weird medical curiosity, but she kept glancing at my glass after every sip. About half an hour in, I noticed my face felt slightly warm. I assumed it was just the wine, but I hadn't even finished half of it. My chest felt heavy, heartbeat slow but deep. My mind wasn't spinning, it was just like someone had turned the volume down in my head. She asked how I was feeling, smiling like it was a casual question. I said fine, maybe just tired. She nodded like that's what she expected. The next thing I noticed was the waiter whispering to someone near the kitchen. He looked nervous, eyes flicking between us. I thought maybe he was just dealing with a rush. Then everything happened at once. The restaurant door opened, and two uniformed officers came in. They didn't look around long, they came straight to our table. One of them said her name, her real name. I hadn't heard it before. It wasn't Nora. She didn't look surprised. She sighed, put her hands on the table, and calmly said something I couldn't hear. The officers told her to stand. She did slowly, and as she did, I saw the waiter step back, holding my half-finished drink. The officer told me to stay seated, and one of them cuffed her right there. She didn't fight, didn't argue. She just turned to me and said softly, "That's too bad. You would have reacted differently than the others." Then they took her out. The whole restaurant had gone silent. The waiter came over and asked if I was okay. He looked pale. He said they'd been told to call the police if she ever came back. Apparently she'd been there before, more than once, with different men. He said the last guy she'd been with had gotten dizzy and passed out halfway through their meal. The police had been investigating her for months. She worked at a private clinic where sedatives went missing regularly. They suspected she was stealing them, testing their effects on people she met through dating apps, and then documenting it. I sat there frozen, still processing what had just happened. The waiter told me not to drink anything else and offered to call an ambulance, but I said I felt okay, just lightheaded. A detective showed up not long after to ask me questions. He said she'd been under surveillance, but they hadn't expected her to pick someone new that fast. They tracked her Hinge activity and realized she used it to find what she called natural subjects, people without medical conditions. She'd record their reactions during dinner, sometimes adding small doses of mild sedatives into their drinks. She wasn't trying to kill anyone. She just wanted to study how different people reacted to being dosed unknowingly. She kept handwritten notes on each person, labeling them by initials, describing their responses. Some men reported waking up hours later, others just felt strange and went home without realizing. None of them had connected it back to her until one ended up in the hospital after collapsing in his car. That's when the investigation started. They found small vials of medication in her bag when she was arrested, along with a folded paper containing a list of names. Mine was one of them. Next to my name, it said, "Male subject, no known anxiety history, resisted baseline expected." I went to the hospital that night just to be safe. They ran tests and said there were traces of a sedative in my blood, small enough not to knock me out, but enough to feel strange. A few days later, the story hit the local news. It called her the sedative Samaritan. It sounded almost made up, but it was her. They said she worked at 3 different clinics over the years, and each one had reported missing medication. She told investigators she wasn't harming anyone, just researching human tolerance in uncontrolled settings. I kept thinking about that moment before they arrested her, the way she said I would have reacted differently. I wonder what she meant. I deleted Hinge that night. It's strange because she didn't act evil or unhinged. She acted normal, polite, controlled. The kind of person you trust instantly. Now, whenever someone says they work in medicine, I still hesitate. I don't care if it's a doctor, nurse, or therapist. Every time I see someone wearing scrubs in public, I remember her calm voice, that fake name, and the way she looked completely unfazed as they cuffed her like she already knew how it would end. He seemed off from the first message, but not in a dangerous way, just jittery. His name was Caleb, and he said he worked in it, but didn't use social media anymore because people were tracking him. I thought it was a joke. He wasn't rude or weird in his tone, just guarded, like every question had a filter he ran it through before answering. His photos looked normal, jeans, jacket, average smile, but one of them was strange. It looked like it had been taken in a hospital hallway. The background had that stereo lighting, the kind you only see in clinics. When I asked about it, he said it was an old photo from when he was doing research. I didn't think much of it then. We decided to meet at a small diner just outside town. He said he liked quiet places where he could see all exits. I laughed, thinking he was being dramatic about safety, but he didn't laugh back. He said it was important to always know who could walk in behind you. When I got there, he was already sitting in the corner booth facing the window. He looked almost exactly like his pictures, but more tense, eyes darting every few seconds, jaw tight. He greeted me politely, stood to shake my hand, then immediately turned back toward the window like he was watching for someone. He didn't order anything except coffee. He said food made him sluggish, and he needed to stay alert. He kept glancing toward the door, then at the reflection of the street behind us through the glass. At first, I thought maybe he had anxiety, but then he started talking. He said people had been following him for months, neighbors, strangers, even delivery drivers. He said someone planted microphones in his walls. I tried to be gentle, saying maybe he was just stressed or imagining things, but he leaned forward and whispered that I shouldn't say too much because there were cameras in the diner too. He nodded toward the ceiling vent, claiming it wasn't a vent at all. My stomach tightened. Part of me wanted to leave right then, but something in his voice was too calm. It wasn't manic. It was like he completely convinced himself this was real. He asked if I'd ever felt watched before. I said no, and he studied my face like he didn't believe me. Then he asked if I had any family in the area. When I said yes, he nodded again like that was useful. I tried to shift the conversation, asked about his job, but he said he'd stopped working after the incident. When I asked what incident, he went quiet for a long time, staring out the window. Then he said softly that some people can't handle the truth when it's too close. At that point, I wanted to leave politely. I said I needed to head out soon because I had errands to run. He said it was fine, but asked if I could drop him off near his apartment since he walked. I hesitated but said sure. It was still daylight, and I didn't want to be rude. As we got in my car, he asked me to turn off my phone. I said no, and he got visibly uncomfortable. He said phones were how they tracked movement. He stared out the window the entire drive, shoulders tense, eyes darting at passing cars like he was expecting one to follow us. He told me to pull into a small side street near some old apartment blocks. I didn't even see any doors or buildings there, just a long alley. I stopped, and before I could say anything, he said not to move for a second. He stepped out, walked a few steps forward, then crouched behind a car, peeking over it. I thought maybe he dropped something, but then he motioned for me to stay still. That's when I saw the lights. 2 police cars turning the corner at the far end of the street. My heart sank. I had no idea what was happening, but Caleb's body stiffened. He started muttering to himself, pacing fast. I rolled down the window to ask if he was okay, but he ran back toward the car and told me not to say his name to anyone. He said if they asked, I didn't know him, and I should keep driving like nothing happened. Before I could even react, the police cars pulled up with sirens off but lights flashing. 2 officers stepped out, one hand on his belt, one holding a radio. They told me to stay in the car and asked if I was with him. I said yes, we were on a date. The taller officer looked at me like he couldn't believe it. He asked if I knew who he was. I said just his first name. The officer sighed and said they'd been looking for him since early that morning. Apparently, he'd escaped from a psychiatric unit across town. He wasn't dangerous in the typical sense, but he'd been on an involuntary hold after threatening hospital staff and claiming they implanted chips in him. He walked out during a shift change and disappeared. They'd been tracking his phone history and found messages from dating apps. That's how they found me. While they talked, Caleb stood a few feet away, hands up, voice trembling. He kept saying he didn't belong there, that he was fine now. Then he turned to me and begged quietly, almost whispering, asking me not to tell them his real name. He said if I did, they'd make him disappear. The police gently cuffed him, not rough or loud, just steady. He didn't fight, but he kept looking at me like I was betraying him just by standing there. They took him to one of the cars and asked me to come to the station to give a statement. I told them everything, that I didn't know he'd escaped, that I thought he just had anxiety. The officer said it wasn't my fault. They found he'd been creating fake dating profiles under slightly different names, each time meeting new people in public spaces to test trust. He believed he could find someone who wouldn't report him even if he told the truth about where he came from. When I got home, I sat in my car for almost an hour. I couldn't stop replaying the look on his face, the calm before it all, the panic when he saw the cops, and the quiet plea not to give him away. I Googled his name later that night. There was a short article about the escape, but nothing else. No updates, no photo, just a line about him being safely returned to care. Sometimes I still wonder if he was really paranoid or if he knew something that nobody believed. But mostly, I just think about how close I came to being part of a story I wouldn't have survived if the police hadn't shown up when they did. Now, I always meet people in crowded places. I don't care if it's loud or awkward. I'll take noise over silence any day.